Dr. Dan Tweeten here, and I want to discuss an important subject when it comes to health that I believe doesn't get the attention it deserves, and that is the steady decrease in testosterone levels among men in modern times, as well as a decrease in fertility rates in both men and women. A decrease in testosterone below normal levels is associated with numerous detrimental health effects, including infertility, increased body fat, insulin resistance, poor muscle and bone health, resulting in increased risk of fracture, erectile dysfunction, and loss of libido. In today's day and age, there are many lifestyle and environmental factors that may cause endocrine disruption and therefore affect the hormone system, including testosterone. So we need to examine both lifestyle factors and environmental factors, because the studies show that even if certain lifestyle factors are controlled for, such as obesity, there's still a decline in testosterone over time. So there's also environmental factors we need to look at as well. So in this video, I will be taking a scientific approach to both lifestyle and environmental factors and what we can do about them to try to help with endocrine disruption and this major problem we face. The scientific studies I have looked at, I will link in the description below. Before we get started, I want to give the following disclaimer. Although I'm a practicing chiropractor in the small town of Washington, Iowa, these videos are intended for educational purposes only. You should always do your own research before making any healthcare related changes, and please discuss with a qualified healthcare practitioner before making any healthcare related changes. We need to have a brief discussion when it comes to endocrinology and the sex hormones. This is going to be a surface level discussion on the physiology behind this process, but the basic gist of it is you have your pituitary gland, which sits in your brain, and it senses the level of sex hormones such as testosterone. If testosterone drops too low, it'll stimulate the pituitary gland to release GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. And this hormone acts upon the hypothalamus and stimulates it to release two separate hormones, LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. These two hormones act upon the sex organs in the human, and in males, LH will act upon the Leydig cells and instruct them to release testosterone, and FSH will act upon the Sertoli cells and instruct them to manufacture male sex cells. And as the Leydig cells start to release testosterone, the overall testosterone levels in the body will begin to rise under normal circumstances. And this increase in testosterone will be sensed by the pituitary gland, which will shut down the production of GnRH. Hence, you have a negative feedback loop. So this video will focus on both lifestyle and environmental factors that might disrupt this normal physiological function within the endocrine system. And to start, we should have a discussion on lifestyle factors. First, let's talk about getting enough quality sleep at night, because sleep is absolutely essential to the normal function of the endocrine system and its metabolic processes. And lack of sleep has been associated with lower levels of testosterone. They've even done studies on obstructive sleep apnea, which also shows lower levels of testosterone in those that have that condition. So to start, if you think you have sleep apnea, I'd recommend you get a sleep study to verify if you have that condition. And then from there, you just want to make sure that you're getting enough quality sleep at night, anywhere from 7 to 9 hours at least. And with this, you want to make sure you're setting your circadian rhythm, going to bed and getting up at the same time each night. Light exposure can help with that. Getting up, going for a walk, getting some light, some sunlight in your eyes first thing in the morning. And then controlling your light exposure at night, not looking at a cell phone, not looking at a TV screen, dimming the lights at least a half hour before bed would be good. You want to examine the sleep surface you're on. Make sure your mattress isn't too old and is giving you good support. You want to make sure that your pillow is also good for you as well. And it might even help to have some light dimming curtains to block out the light when you're trying to sleep. Obesity is also a major problem when it comes to the function of the endocrine system. Fat tissue increases the activity of the enzyme aromatase, which converts testosterone into estrogen. So you might get an excess level of estrogen in obese individuals. And fat cells also lead to the overproduction of pro-inflammatory cytokines and reactive oxygen species, which might be detrimental to the endocrine system. So we need some dietary approaches that might help. First, I would avoid trans fats and overly processed foods. Trans fats just plain and simply are not good for you, and they negatively affect your hormone system. They've been shown to cause oxidative stress to the endocrine system, which obviously would affect testosterone levels. And you just want to steer clear of overly processed foods as well, or at least have them in moderation. And you know what these things are: the cookies, the candies, the cakes. Basically just sugar, fat, and salt with little micronutrients, little nutrients within the food itself. You want to focus on eating enough vegetables and fruits, especially the green leafy vegetables such as spinach and kale. And for fruits, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries are great. For one, the fruits and vegetables have fiber, and fiber binds with estrogen, which might help flush it from the system and keep it in normal levels. And these fruits and vegetables also have flavonoids. They have an interesting function within the Leydig cells and allow the mitochondria within the Leydig cells to absorb cholesterol, improving their function, which would help the release of testosterone. It's also important to get enough high-quality, healthy fats in the diet. First, let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids like what is found in fatty fish. The omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory in nature, and they also help to improve both sperm motility and DHA concentration. And it's also good to get healthy fats such as avocado and olive oil. I would caution that you want to make sure you're getting a high-quality olive oil source, and you want to make sure it's in a glass rather than a plastic bottle for reasons we'll discuss later. It's also good to get enough protein from lean meats such as chicken, turkey, fish, even lean cuts of steak. I would caution, however, that you don't want to go overboard on the protein intake, and you do want to balance it with the carbohydrates and fats, because an excessively high protein intake has been associated with lower testosterone levels. Fermented foods such as kefir, yogurt, and sauerkraut are great due to their probiotic content. And probiotics are the good gut bacteria that help protect against gut dysbiosis, which has been shown to affect fertility rates negatively. And a nice thing about Greek yogurt and kefir is they contain calcium, and calcium is essential for normal sex cell function and production. And since we mentioned calcium, we might as well discuss the other micronutrients necessary for normal testosterone and endocrine function. Let's talk about boron first. Boron is important for the body's use of testosterone and estrogen, and it's also been shown to reduce inflammatory biomarkers, which might affect the endocrine system, and subsequently it might help increase testosterone levels. Vitamin D acts as a hormone in the body, and in fact, the Leydig and Sertoli cells have receptors for vitamin D, so a deficiency would obviously affect the normal function of these cells and affect testosterone levels. Zinc is another one you want to avoid a deficiency in because it is essential for testicular development and steroidogenesis. And to wrap up the micronutrients, magnesium is essential for normal sex cell production and function, so obviously you want to avoid a deficiency in magnesium as well. I do want to make mention of some other lifestyle factors that might affect normal endocrine system function and testosterone levels, and that's the use of alcohol and tobacco, which have been shown to be detrimental. Alcohol in particular has been shown to adversely affect all the functions of the physiology of the endocrine system that I discussed, both the pituitary gland function, hypothalamus function, and the sex organ function themselves. So obviously alcohol can have an extremely detrimental effect, and you want to put limitations in your alcohol consumption. Another important lifestyle factor when it comes to the endocrine system and keeping obesity under control is physical activity and exercise. And exercise, specifically resistance training and cardiovascular training, has been shown to be good for both endocrine function and testosterone levels. Resistance training, that is lifting heavy weights, at least in the short term, has been shown to cause a release of testosterone. And cardiovascular training is good for the overall health of the body and keeping obesity, body fat levels under control. And so long as it's not done in excess, hours and hours on end, which would obviously increase cortisol, which might be detrimental. As long as it's not done in excess, it would be beneficial for the body. Another thing to watch out for is heat exposure and being careful with things such as hot tubs, hot baths, and saunas. Even being careful with tight-fitting, overly hot clothing. Because if the testes become overheated, it affects the Leydig cells' function or ability to secrete testosterone. So just be careful about overheating the testes and affecting the function of the Leydig cells. A field of study that I find fascinating is how winning affects levels of testosterone. And indeed, studies do show that those that continuously win have increased levels of testosterone and are more willing to compete. There's an interesting link between the neurotransmitter dopamine and testosterone. And dopamine, it's a reward neurotransmitter that's released as you're accomplishing moving towards a goal or an objective. And so it kind of acts synergistically with testosterone. So as you're moving towards a goal, dopamine's being released, which is rewarding you. And then as you achieve a win, testosterone is released, encouraging you to be more competitive. So my advice here is just to have a winner's mindset, have small goals, or at least have incremental goals that you can accomplish and achieve every day so that you're constantly winning, which might help increase testosterone. And we can dive into the subject of herbals because certain herbal supplements have been shown to affect testosterone and endocrine function. I do want to caution here yet again that you always need to do your own research and discuss with a qualified healthcare practitioner before diving in or taking any of these substances. First up, we have Ashwagandha, and this herbal supplement might help increase testosterone levels and sex cell function, as well as improve the balance of LH and FSH. It seems to have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, and it might help reduce levels of cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone, which if it gets too high can have a negative effect on testosterone. It seems to have an inverse relationship with testosterone. So keeping cortisol levels under control might help increase testosterone levels in people that have a problem with too much cortisol. Up next is Fenugreek, and Fenugreek is another herbal that might increase testosterone. And it also seems to have an effect in lowering cortisol in people whose cortisol is too high. TONGKAT Ali is an herbal supplement which might increase luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, in effect, increasing testosterone production from the Leydig cells. And it might also help inhibit the enzyme aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. The next herbal, Fadogia Agrestis, due to its saponin content, might increase the release of luteinizing hormone, again, which would increase the release of testosterone. And lastly, for the herbals, we have Mucuna PRURIENS, which has been shown to improve dopamine levels. Again, remember, dopamine seems to have a synergistic effect with testosterone. And in fact, this herbal supplement does seem to improve testosterone levels. Now, that's quite a few herbals, and you might be wondering, how exactly do I determine which one, if any, to take? And again, you'll want to talk with a qualified healthcare practitioner, but perhaps a practical approach is just to look at what you might have going on and say if you're overly stressed and maybe your cortisol levels are too high, well, you might look at the herbals that decrease cortisol, such as ashwagandha and fenugreek. And say maybe you're lacking ambition, you just don't have much drive, well, you might want to affect your dopamine levels and take a look at Mucuna PRURIENS. And just for a general boost in testosterone levels, TONGKAT Ali and Fadogia Agrestis might be two to try. Let's switch gears here and talk about some environmental factors that might affect your endocrine system and affect your testosterone levels. And these are going to be things that you're putting on or in your body, things that you're consuming or applying. First, let's talk about self-care products. This is going to be your soaps, your shampoos, your skin creams, that sort of thing. You want to be careful with these because they might contain two substances, phthalates and parabens. Both of these substances act as estrogens in the body. And indeed, with these environmental exposures, we're talking about things that are estrogenic, which act as estrogen, or anti-androgens. And another source of estrogenic exposure is from plastics. So things like plastic water bottles have BPA in them. And especially if it's exposed to heat, the BPA will seep into the liquid in the bottle. And if you drink it, you're getting exposed to BPA, which acts as estrogen. And so you want to be careful with bottles, especially if they're exposed to heat and made of plastic. You also want to be careful with your olive oil or fat sources and make sure they come in a glass bottle rather than a plastic bottle because the fats also absorb BPA. So be careful with your drinking sources and using plastics. Another common self-care product people use is sunscreen. And you want to choose sunscreens that are zinc-based. And if they're not zinc-based, they likely have oxybenzone in it. And this is another estrogenic substance. So be careful with your sunscreen. Make sure you're using zinc-based sunscreen. And circling back to drinking water, in addition to avoiding plastics and instead drinking from glass and stainless steel, you also want to filter your water as well, because typically municipalities aren't filtering it adequately. And especially if you lived in a very population-dense city, some of the estrogenic substances might not be completely filtered out, such as birth control. And even in farm areas, the use of pesticides such as atrazine aren't always filtered out. So using a charcoal-based filter might be good for filtering out some of these estrogenic substances. Speaking of atrazine, if you want another reason to avoid processed foods such as processed grains, pesticides such as atrazine and glyphosate are often found in these foods, and these are estrogenic in nature. If you want more information when it comes to environmental exposure to estrogenics, I highly recommend reading the book Estrogeneration by Anthony J. He goes much deeper into this subject and the scientific studies supporting the fact that we are constantly bombarded by estrogenic substances in our environment. I'll put a link in the description below on how you can get a copy. In conclusion, as you can see, there are a multitude of lifestyle and environmental factors that can cause disruption of the endocrine system, in turn affecting the levels of hormones, including testosterone, and this might affect fertility rates as well. So this has severe consequences when it comes to individual health and public health at large. So hopefully this gave you some tools, some tips, some tricks to help with your endocrine system, and hopefully this video helps shed light on the seriousness of this situation.